Eating local, not as easy as you think. Next on Wyoming Chronicle. Hello, I'm Richard Ager. Welcome to Wyoming Chronicle. Author and food activist Michael Pollan has observed people are more willing to spend money on cable TV or their cell phones than they are on food. Let's shift that spending, he says, to food that nourishes and keeps us healthy, rather than puts us on medications. Well, those are strong words, but they describe an evolution or revolution in the way we think about what we eat. And much more about that in a moment. But first, a look at how some Wyoming food enthusiasts are serving up their message of eating fresh, eating local.
This is the Mountain Valley mushrooms. We made a sauce for the beef. This is the Idaho potato empanadas that Tanya from Forage made. I'm blown away actually at the bounty that we've gotten so early in the year, because it is May 25th and it was snowing this morning when I came over the pass.
Alpine style cheese. It's modeled after the cheeses in the Pyrenees and the Italian Alps.
Long before the first garden tomato ripened in Wyoming, a local harvest was gathered from high mountain fields, cellars, and greenhouses. Hungry yet? This is simple food, but it doesn't come easy. There's politics involved. In Pinedale, Ross Kamen's A Slow Food in the Tetons partnered with local producer Maggie Palmer and other educators
what you're looking for is
to host a Locavore event, a gathering of farmers and consumers rethinking what healthy, safe food can mean in Wyoming.
Florida imports 95% of its food.
A Locavore hero and farmer, Joe Soliton, came all the way from Virginia to deliver a rousing speech.
Wyoming imports 95% of its food. I mean, there's a lot of food being produced, but it's trucks passing in the night.
For reasons ranging from local jobs to healthier lives, these farmers and ranchers are taking up the charge, digging local food from local dirt for local markets. They sell to chefs, grocery stores, farmers markets, and even online. And they can't keep up with the demand.
I had cauliflower, cabbage, lettuce, onions, green beans, turnips, cucumbers, and summer squash. Sold out of everything except the onions, 20 or 30 minutes after we started selling.
Steve Doyle manages one of Riverton's 2 weekly farmers markets. He sees farmers struggling now, but he believes there's a profitable future.
Our food bill here in Fremont County is something like $100 million annually. That's our annual food bill according to the Department of Commerce. What if we could hold like 20% of that here? $20 million reinvested in Fremont County year after year after year. Actually, it's huge, huge. So we're not talking about little things anymore. This is really quite a large concept.
Chris Sherrard is a local poultry producer who thinks state inspection and certification is a good investment and the right thing to do.
I hope to market these birds all over the state, and I hope to encourage other people to become grower producers.
But at recent public hearings on consumer safety regulations, farmers and consumers turned out to express their frustration over what they feel are burdensome and costly regulations.
We're not selling to millionaires.
So the debate over how to safely meet consumer demand continues.
What we're competing against are these multinational corporations who have pounded down all of these very onerous and restrictive regulations.
And for some, the issue is not just access to the food they want, but encroachment on personal freedom, like in the case of a statewide ban on the retail sale of raw milk.
I guess what it boils down to is whose job is it to protect the meat? Is it my job or is it your job?
Their job. They pay.
And the next question is, from there, whose job is it to raise my child? Is it my job? Or is it the government's job?
Trust in the local grower remains a central selling point. Marilyn Jones also buys local eggs.
Are you ever concerned about health issues with some of this stuff?
No, I'm not. I think they're fresher than what we get in the store, so I don't mind them at all. but I get them at home. I have a lady that delivers them to my house, so I didn't buy any today, but I'm tempted to get some of that fresh chicken.
That's just a few of them.
After 2 months of processing in their new certified facility,
Then he hands them to me.
the Sherrards are happy with the way their facility is working out. So you think a 5-year return on this investment is reasonable?
Well, the daughter had it figured out in 3 years the first year, but we spend a little more money.
We're 100 birds behind right now with orders. We'll be looking at hiring 1 or 2 more people at least.
Going next.
This is about community, getting people together, getting the producers together with the processors. We have Maria buying beans from the Mills farm. Those kind of relationships are really important, and what's happening here downtown is pretty cool.
And joining me in the studio are Dean Finkenbinder, Manager of Consumer Health Services for the Wyoming Department of Agriculture, and Mike Ridenour, owner of Meadow Made Foods in Yoder, and Sue Wallis, a Wyoming State Representative and sponsor of the Food Freedom Act. Well, welcome all of you. Thanks for joining us. I'd like to deal with that word locavore first. Now, I've heard of omnivore eating everything. I assume this is just meaning eating local?
That's right.
That's it.
Okay, we've got that resolved. You know, Stephanie Smith, who produced that opening piece, told me about a fresh, locally fed chicken that she bought at a local farmer's market. Delicious, she said, but over $3 a pound, much more than at the supermarket. So my question is that the price that we would have to pay for better food? I mean, is it for the economic elite?
Richard, I think what you need to keep in mind is that mass-produced food that is industrially produced in other states is heavily subsidized by the government for the specific purpose of keeping food prices low. Your local farmers and ranchers, on the other hand, have to charge a price that covers the full cost of producing those animals on a small scale. So generations of American citizens have been sort of trained by mass marketing campaigns to think of food primarily in terms of price. And what Michael Pollan, many of the people that you saw in the earlier piece, many of us are working for, is a change of attitude that says it's much better to pay more and maybe buy less, but to have the quality of food that you want for your family and your health.
You know, Mike, I assume you don't get those kind of subsidies that Sue was talking about. Do you have to charge more for your beef than you would pay at a supermarket?
Yeah, and the way we always describe it is we bear the full cost of production. When you talk about, you know, like the grocery store beef or something like that, part of your tax money that you send in every year goes towards your food. You're subsidizing it, and so you're paying for it one way or another. It's just that you get to see the full price at market from us, where at the grocery store you don't. They hide it in your taxes and other things.
I think overall there's a central issue running through all of the debates of local agriculture, and that is, you know, we want fresh, we want local, but we also need safe. And Dean, you know, your title, of course, Manager of Consumer Health Services. What kind of balancing act do you have to perform every day in your duties?
Well, Richard, we're charged with safeguarding the public health and assuring that the consumers have safe food, unadulterated food, honestly presented. And we do that through our Wyoming Food Safety Rule. And we try to ensure that all licensed and inspected facilities are following the food rule and that they're providing a safe food to the public.
So you have inspectors that go out and check things out?
Yes, we inspect all the food establishments in the state where there is no local health department.
And how frequently do you encounter problems, people not following the regulations?
Well, it'll vary from place to place, but it can be, you know, we inspect maybe once, twice, or 4 times a year. Those establishments that are being inspected 4 times a year are those that need a little more help. And so that's where we have run into the problems, and so we're in there more often.
And how do you enforce? I mean, do you have some real teeth in the regulations that you apply?
Yes, we do. But what we do is we give the operator a chance to make corrections. If we find violations, we'll give them a certain amount of time to make the corrections. Then we come back and do a follow-up inspection. And if they still haven't made all of them, we'll give them a little more time. But then if it appears that they aren't going to follow the regulations, then we go to the Attorney General office.
Well, you know, Mike, for a dozen years now, you've been raising grass-fed beef and selling it direct to consumers yourself. Did it take a while to get started? I mean, did you run into any problems along the way?
Actually, 12 years ago, hardly anybody knew what grass-fed beef was. We spent a lot of time in the early years just explaining what it is and what are the benefits of it over other options that they might have.
Well, I mean,
in the last
eating hay, what is the advantage?
It is a healthier product. The fatty
is there a simple reason why?
Yeah, the fatty acid profile is much different in grass-fed beef than it is in grain-fed beef. And
fatty acid profile, I'll have to write that down.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. But you're saying there are proven health benefits, though?
Yes, and more we're seeing, you know, a lot more research coming out, not just from the medical community, but from nutritionists and other people. But in the last 5 years, I'd say that whole situation has changed. The consumers are a lot more savvy and a lot more informed about what is out there and what they can
You know, it seems like food science is an exploding field, isn't it? You know, a lot of literature these days. Is it tough to keep up?
Definitely. Definitely. You know, our Wyoming food safety rule is based on the latest scientific evidence in food safety, and so we try and keep up with that, and it's there's a lot more information out there anymore.
And just like in every other area, from climate change to economics to food safety, you'll find dueling scientists. You'll find peer-reviewed articles that have diametrically opposed positions on many subjects. And
I've encountered some of that in preparing for this show, definitely.
Yeah.
You know, so I wanted to ask you, because there was something that you said that I wanted to quote you on. You said, quote, this issue of local food brings together the extremist ends of the political spectrum, from crusty old conservative ranchers, I'm not sure why they're crusty, but anyway, to tree-hugging liberal greenies. No cliches here. But everybody just loves good food and wants more of it. So my question to you is, can you accomplish what all of Congress can't? End the gridlock and everyone chow down?
I think we can in Wyoming.
Wow.
In Wyoming, because Wyoming is a different, you know, we have a very collegial legislature. We work across the aisle all the time. We form coalitions with very different opinions all the time. And this particular issue does bring together those folks who are really interested in freedom and liberty, as well.
Independence, I guess, right?
Independence, the ability to stand on your own 2 feet and make your own way in the world, as well as those who are very environmentally inclined and are looking for ways to live lives that are healthy and free of contamination and pollution. So it's really a great coalition that's come together over these things.
Does that sound familiar to you, Mike?
Yes, it does. And there's I would say, probably rapidly growing portion of the population, the consumers themselves, that are driving some of this as well. I mean, they're probably a little bit ahead of the legislature in what they would like.
Fancy that. People ahead of the legislature. I've never heard of such a thing.
Well, and the other thing is that because we have so few people in Wyoming, politics and policy is very personal. And so we have great access to our government agencies. We have great access to our leadership. The common citizen knows exactly who to call and who to complain to when they have a problem. And they are listened to. And I think that's a great advantage to Wyoming. And so, as Senator Bebout talked about at the public meetings we had here in Riverton a month or so ago, we have the ability to really create a food safety and agriculture policy system here in Wyoming that fits Wyoming.
Well, I think obviously there are still unresolved issues, as we all know, because when you balance those issues of safety versus freedom, you get an argument sometimes, I hear. There was one thing I wanted to mention, and that's about the relative food independence, as it were. We talk about energy independence, but there's food independence of Wyoming, and clearly we're not independent. According to food activist Joel Salatin, who's in the opening piece, Wyoming imports, according to him, 95% of its food, and even our beef, which is raised here, is processed elsewhere and comes back to us. So I guess this also gets into how important is it to, my apologies, beef up our in-state food supplies. And you oversee this, Dean. How important do you think that food or steps towards food independence would be?
Well, I think it's very important. I know Wyoming does raise a lot of good beef, a lot of good meat, produce. One thing the department has done to kind of assist in those areas is we've received grants from USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, to have incubator kitchens start up around the state so that people can take their produce or whatever they're growing to these kitchens and process it and see if that product is gonna make it. And it gives them a method to process that food without a large investment.
But of course beef is such a huge industry, but we don't really process it.
That's true. That's true. We have a number of state-inspected meat plants where the beef can go to those plants, but then it can only be sold within the state of Wyoming. It has to go through a federally inspected plant in order to be sold outside the state.
Mike, do you think economic feasibility is the issue here? I mean, on a relatively small scale, you're doing the whole thing.
Some of it is economics, and some of it is I guess, inertia as well. I mean, seriously, building a meat processing facility from scratch and getting it set up and under USDA inspection is not a trivial process. But it hopefully, as the movement continues to grow in the state and the demand for more local foods continues, that we'll see it, because right now all of us that do this take our beef out of state because to cross state lines it's got to have a USDA stamp on it.
Are we a big enough market?
I think so, but it's this local market. It's this locavore movement that's going to support it, and it takes a completely different scale than USDA is set up. You know, they're set up to provide inspection to gigantic beef plants that are processing 4,000 animals an hour and stuff like that. Where in this state we need a much smaller scale that's more attuned to quality and specific customer wants and desires. And I think we have the ability to do that. Ohio was very recently just become the first state that has a interstate shipment of state-inspected meats program approved by USDA. And I think many of us are hopeful that Wyoming will follow suit, and that'll help that problem. But you know, we also have an opportunity in things like grain milling and the produce and all of Wyoming historically had a very, and still does, has a rich heritage of all kinds of food production. We at one time had 1,000 dairies.
A few months back, actually, in the newspaper Riverton Ranger, they published a letter from Jack Lee of the Fremont Local Foods Coalition. He claimed that new ag regulations would turn small poultry producers into, I quote him, poultry pirates who could face a $1,000 fine for just selling their birds. There are no new regulations regarding poultry. There is a exemption from USDA inspection, and that's daily inspection of the birds. Is it easier because of any changes for small producers to operate, or is it about the same? Has the playing field been changed?
For those that want to produce poultry, we have required that facilities be constructed in order to provide a safe product. There are some that don't think they need to do that, and then there's some that are doing it right.
So for those who don't think they need to do that, which I guess is the crux of the matter here, well, what happens? I mean,
let me take a shot at this from a different direction.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, what we have is a situation now where it is perfectly legal for someone to own an animal, whether it's a chicken or a beef, prior to having it processed. And if they own that animal prior to processing, they can work with a rancher. They can own a half of an animal or a quarter of an animal. For a chicken, that doesn't make much sense, but for a beef, it makes a lot of sense. But for instance, our ranch, my brother particularly, raises grass-fed beef as well as poultry and pork and other things. Almost all of what he raises, he sells to people on the hoof or on the hoof. And so those people own those birds, if it's birds, ahead of time. And he has a setup that is very clean and sanitary, but we do it out in the open air and with hot water and an automatic plucking machine and the whole 9 yards, and he provides those birds to them. In order for him to be able to sell those birds at a farmer's market under current law and rule, he would have to have an enclosed facility that meets all of the requirements that Dean was talking about. So you kind of have two things going on here. And I think, for me, philosophically, where the question comes down is that I think that there is a very legitimate and proper role for regulation. And that is whenever there are intermediaries in the chain from the producer to the consumer. So if that bird is going to be sold in a grocery store or somewhere where the consumer does not have direct interaction, doesn't know who produced it or how they produced it, just picks it off of a grocery shelf, then there needs to be inspection and regulation to make sure that those products are safe, because the consumer, the United States consumer, expects we have the safest food supply in the world, and part of the reason is we have these things set up.
I take it there's agreement around the table on this one.
For the most part,
because we can move on at this point, because the area actually I wanted to get to is the question of selling raw milk and related dairy products. Wyoming doesn't allow the sale of raw milk. Other states do. Idaho is an example. Your proposed Food Freedom Act would allow direct sales from producer to consumer at farms or farmer markets. Well, why not supermarkets?
Well, because you lose that direct contact.
So that's the key here, isn't it?
The Food Freedom Bill, drilled down to its most essential element, is very simple. As long as it's a deal between you and me, there should be no government regulation. But if there is an intermediary in that process, then it should be under the established food safety
Dean, what do you
rules and
think?
regulations.
Does that fit your measure of food safety? If it's a direct sale between presumably one source, which the other person trusts?
Well, we have a little different view. In our Wyoming food safety rule, a few years back, we inserted a chapter or section on raw milk, that it could not be sold or provided or anything, which was a little stringent. So this, I guess, was last year we started working on the proposed regulations, and we inserted a subsection that would allow raw milk to be sold to any, or not sold, but provided to any family member where that animal is owned.
So no money can change hands?
The only place the money was exchanging hand would have been in maybe the animal.
Is that a satisfactory?
It is, if, and that's one of the things that came out of these public meetings and public hearings, is that those of us who support the ability to own animals or shares of animals and be able to use milk think that this new rule does clarify that the owners can do that, but it needs to remove the word solely so that people can own shares of herds.
Well, I think one thing we should address before we leave this subject is just the safety of raw milk, because as you're probably well aware, the recent Centers for Disease Control study found that states where raw milk can be sold at retail has more than twice the rate of outbreaks, and it gets even worse compared to pasteurized milk. According to the CDC, raw milk is 150 times more likely to cause an outbreak than pasteurized milk.
The CDC study is in fact skewed, because what they have done is they have gone back and carefully, by picking their time frame, carefully excluded a massive outbreak of pasteurized milk foodborne illnesses. And by doing that, and then also they include things like cheese that was actually out of Mexico that they determined was raw milk, and they include those things
we need to move on to this, but
so
Dean,
quickly, this is the dueling science.
I understand, but you read the same studies, Dean. What's your take on this?
Well, like Sue mentioned earlier, we have opposing views, and I tend to follow the CDC statistics, and we look at those.
Do you believe them?
Yes, I do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I'm going to thank all of you, because that is the last word for now. My thanks to Sue Wallis, Mike Ridenour, Dean Finkenbinder, and be sure to join us next time on Wyoming Chronicle.